Welcome to Pillars of Leadership podcast. Today we are with Tom Harper. Morning, Tom.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Doug.
Yeah, good to have you. We were talking before the show just about how we connected, and it was a little bit of a mystery, but we figured
Mhm.
out it had to do with the topic of leadership. So we will delve in to that today. This is one of the few podcasts I've had where I really don't have a full-blown theme going into it. So we are counting on God to put his stamp on and 2 cents upon what he may want to cover as we go through today. So Tom is the executive chairman and co-founder of Networld. I always say Networld Media Group, and that was founded in 2000, correct?
Yes.
We'll
Yes.
let you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that. And I know how we did connect. It was on a great website called biblicalleadership.com. And we'll put that up on the screen so that y'all get a chance to look at that. And some of what Tom's going to talk about today came directly from some devotions that he had worked through there. Great. So he's authored 6 books, and we'll talk about a couple of those today. He actually wrote a fictional book called Inner Threats, Servant Leader Strong, Leading from the Lion's Den. So some great topics there that we'll cover today. Anything you'd like to cover, Tom, on your history or an update on what you've been up to lately?
I just maybe some of the people watching this, or maybe a lot of them, including you, Doug, are in the business world, and that's where God has kept me. So back in, what was it, probably 2000, the 1999, I thought I wanted to go into ministry full time. And I had been a believer for about 5 years, and we were about to have our first child. I was about to co-found Networld, and I wanted also to go to seminary. And my wise wife looked at me and just said, way too much all at the same time. So, it's I've been in the business world. I've been in the same business ever since then. So, actually, 1997 is when the precursor of Networld started. I was working with my father-in-law, and we were launching websites in 97, really when the internet was just kind of getting started. And we've been online publishers and event producers ever since at Networld. So I'm very much in the business world. I also am involved at church as a lay leader. I'm an elder there, and occasionally will teach. And so I've been doing that for quite a while as well. So I have a foot in business and foot in the church world as well.
That's good. Yeah, a lot of my podcasts have been focused on the academics that I studied and had been through on the topic of leadership, reading their books, reading their journal articles, and it seems like there's this misconception that you have to be on the ministry side or you have to be on the marketplace side.
Yeah.
And even growing up and coming to know the Lord back in 1991, there was this wrestling that took place in me that, well, I need to go into ministry. I'm not sure
Yeah.
where that came from, but it's almost like a divisional imaginary lines that have been drawn. What went through your mind back then? Because you had everything on the table and you had a choice to make, it sounds like.
Well, I did. In fact, I would say God used my wife really to speak wisdom, because I've always been a dreamer, entrepreneurial type, always involved in something creative and building things. And so back then, being as young as I was, I also didn't have the wisdom of knowing my limits. So I needed to be told my limits. So what happened is I decided not to go into vocational ministry. I didn't go pursue a degree. I wanted to do what you've done, get a PhD in maybe leadership or ministry of some sort. And instead, I just took a few classes at local Bible college with a friend, and I just studied. I just read a lot. And what happened is um, I met a guy named Tom Rainer, who was here at Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville. And he had come from the business world. He was a banker, and then he became a professor at seminary and stayed there as the dean of the Billy Graham School at Southern. And I met him, and it was probably 2002, maybe or so. And we put together an organization called the Society for Church Consulting. And we trained church consultants. So it was kind of a nonprofit, but it was a bit of a business, and it was serving ministry. So it was a parachurch ministry business.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that God just wanted to keep me in the business world. So what he did, I'll grab my book. My first book ever was called Career Crossover. I don't know if that's showing up on the
Perfect.
screen. Okay. And the subtitle was Leaving the Marketplace for Ministry. And I basically just did a research project that Tom Rainer helped me with on the journeys that pastors had made from the marketplace into ministry. And I think I discovered something like 70 or 80% of pastors had a marketplace background, which
Hmm.
was fascinating to me. And but since then, I've really come to terms with the fact that the siloed approach to ministry in the marketplace is a bit an error. It's kind of like in the marketplace, I'm in ministry. You know, it's just that I am doing my ministry in this environment. And my son, who wants to be a pastor, is going to be in a church environment doing ministry. You might call that vocational ministry, I guess, to define it, what it is, being paid by the church to do the work of ministry. And but still, there's no real difference in the kingdom approach to doing ministry in the marketplace, in a nonprofit, in a church. Like in my case, I'm paid by the marketplace, but I do most of my biblical leadership kind of stuff in the church as a volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
So the marketplace job is enabling my leadership in the church, if that makes sense. And I don't have to be a financial burden on the church because I've got a job in the marketplace. But at the same time, it's not dichotomous. It's not either or. At the same time, I have learned over the past decades to treat my calling in the marketplace as a ministry. So whether it's with my employees or at conferences, there's always like a divine appointment. You've heard that term where God brings someone across your path into your life where he wants you to have a conversation with them about faith. And I've had many, many of those that I never would have had if I had not been in the business world. So I'm very glad God's kept me in his kingdom, in the marketplace, and in the church. And I think we're all in a unique place. We all have unique callings and have our own unique, specific place in his kingdom.
Yeah, if we all went to seminary, who would do the work?
Yeah.
So I
Yep.
mean, it's and God does. He may provide, but you may need to carve out those areas of ministry. You look at I mean, Paul even talked about not wanting to be a burden, but in
Right.
the Bible, it doesn't talk a lot about talks about their ex work, the fishermen, the disciples, but the tent making and the woodworking and the funds for the ministry was still required. And the
Mhm.
women, it said, came alongside and did some of that. That's a whole controversial model that we probably won't talk about. But I mean, we try to bucketize these things too much into well, this is how it should be done. Even having
Yeah.
these discussions with my son about the value of a diploma and a bachelor's degree and how you have to have that. You have to be paper trained and you have to have that for your resume. But there is a growing trend, even with Gen Z and the millennials, that you don't have to have that degree. And some of the boundaries or fences that we've artificially put up with how to be successful maybe aren't always the best path.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think we have to be very open and sensitive and patient to what God is going to do in our lives, how he's going to direct us. He will direct our paths if we just trust in him. And we don't try to figure it out. We don't try to lean on our own understanding, as Proverbs 3:5 says, but we acknowledge that he's God, he's the one in control, and he's going to lead me forward. And sometimes I just have to be patient and wait on his leadership rather than me trying to lead my own life all the time, and figure it out and make all my decisions as quickly as possible. And so patience is really hard, and sometimes it's a requirement, but it's not any easier because it's a requirement.
Well, how do you find that balance? Because you can wait so much and hope for God's audible voice or those doors to open magically. And God can do all that. We know he can do that. And he's done that in our lives in some areas. But how have you found that balance throughout your career and ministry to know, when does God open that door? How much do I wait? How patient should I be? How much should I be looking and polishing up my resume? How much should I be advertising? Some of these things are ways of the world, and they're not bad things, but how do you balance that?
That's a really good question. It's a very personal question for all of us. Like, I for me, I have been forced to wait. So it's not like I'm this, super holier than thou kind of person that knows how to wait. I've been forced to, and it's kind of like you pray for patience. What is he going to do? The Lord might try your patience, might force you to be patient. And in the being in the being patient, even though we don't know how, or he's just forcing on us, we come to learn the value of waiting. So like when I have to wait, he starts doing things in my life that let me see the blessings of waiting. Um, you know, I have in my life in times had to wait on him in such a way that it was painful, like it was disconcerting, disencouraging, or, discouraging, and um, really took me down a lot of times. And uh, I just saw him work in ways over that time of waiting that when I got to the end of the waiting period made me a little wiser about waiting. Like he would he would deliver me through whatever I was going through and deliver me like to the next thing in such a way that he would say, look back on what you just went through and let's see how you were blessed by the waiting, what you learned by the waiting, and how you were matured, how you were discipled, and how your faith grew, how you were more resilient, and how you persevered. And when I've done that, I've seen how he grew me in the fruits of the Spirit, in maturity. And so that the next time I had to wait, I remembered what he did last time. And so I had a little more wisdom going into that. So it's just a process that I've seen throughout my life of waiting. And every time I have to wait or I'm worried, they kind of go together, by the way. Worry and waiting kind of go together. I feel like it's almost an embarrassing thing to admit, but I feel like this is a new situation that I've never been in before, God. This is a unique kind of waiting, a unique worry. And I'm not sure you're going to pull me through this one. And that's not very honoring of him. And it's not true because there's nothing impossible for God. And the context of that is when we're relying on him and going through something difficult. So all of our difficulties and times of waiting are very possible for God. In fact, they're so possible, they're guaranteed that he will not only walk with us, but that he will get us through these things into the other side. You can't predict on how he's going to do that or how long it's going to take. And that's the part that gets me, even still today.
Yeah. Do you know the most Googled Bible verse?
No.
What would you guess? Because I got this wrong, and I was
Well,
like my fourth
you know,
guess.
my first one would be John 3:16 because of
Yeah,
Tim Tebow and
yeah.
the on his cheeks. But no, I wouldn't.
Colored rainbow wig. Yeah.
Yeah,
It is Philippians 4:6-7. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done, past tense, like you were talking about.
yes, yes,
Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. And my mom used to say, I never really understood it till I'm getting, an old man now, but she said, worry's a sin. And we know he says don't worry about anything and he'd take care of the sparrows, don't worry about tomorrow. Each day has enough trouble of his own. And that may be harsh to kind of say worry is a sin, but it stuck with me for decades and not one where God's slapping you upside the head saying, come on, believe. There's a scripture, I can't remember where it's found, but the man prays, he said, Lord, help my unbelief.
yes.
That's an honest prayer is I don't believe, I am worrying, I don't have faith. Lord, help my unbelief. Help me not to
Yeah,
worry.
that was the father. It might have been in Luke, but that was the father who was asking Jesus to heal his son. And you can imagine the father saying, I believe you can do it. But maybe in his mind, he's thinking, but I'm not sure you're going to do it. And so that turns into a bit of unbelief. And so that's one of the things that we struggle with. Like, I know everything is possible for you, Lord, but in this situation, I don't know what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it. And I don't know if I'm going to be languishing in this place for a long time. And so that becomes a little bit of this unbelief and we're not trusting him. So um, it's really succinct in that verse. I believe, help my unbelief, and we can all relate to that parent that is struggling with faith over their child who, most of us have had, if we have children, they've been in a, maybe a medical or some kind of injury situation or something that makes us worry and fear. And in that moment, I almost feel like I'm not believing
Hmm.
in the God that I say I believe in.
Right.
And it's just a distraught feeling. And so that's why I really appreciate that the Holy Spirit put that story in the Bible. It's been very encouraging to me.
Yeah. The other encouragement is there's two or three places where God said, and Jesus said, I'm interceding on your behalf right now,
Yeah.
Tom. I mean, right now, by name, whoever's watching this and listening, he's praying for us. And sometimes we don't know how to pray. And it may be, yes, pray for patience. Lord, help me to wait. Pray for open doors and closed doors. One of my favorites is pray for um, me to have a lack of opinion, meaning I'm willing to totally go this route or totally go route B. And I know I'm more comfortable with route A, but Lord, if you want me to do route B, help me to be totally okay with that. So correct my thinking and help me that way. Praying the Psalms is another way that's been good for me is when I don't have the words to pray. And boy, David and the psalmists were pretty honest, you know.
Yeah, pretty raw. Yeah, if you can develop that muscle, when we do Bible study and we pray, it's kind of like we separate the two. Sometimes we say, like, I'm going to read the Bible and then I'm going to pray. I'm going to study the Bible and now it's time to pray. Well, what you just said about praying through the Psalms is a really interesting and I think valuable practice. So let's just take the Psalms. You can read through them and pray them and customize the Psalm to your situation. Because David was surrounded by enemies. He was chased by someone that wanted to kill him. He had committed just a huge sin, an egregious sin of adultery, and then murder, and he was heartbroken over it. He he lost a son.
Yeah.
He had so many things that that were way on that end of the spectrum of heartbreak and worry. And so when we read the Psalms, we get his emotion. And
Yeah.
if we can pray that with him, it's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Lord, I know that you're my shepherd and I'm a sheep. I'm pretty dumb at times, Lord.
Yeah.
My ears are plugged and I'm not listening to the voice of you as shepherd. I lack nothing, Lord. Look at all you've given me and bless me. But Lord, you've given me green pastures. You've given me a home
Yeah.
and you've given me health and you've given me my family and blessings. You've led me beside still waters right now. I'm not going through still waters. It's like being in the boat and the waves are coming, and I need your stillness, Lord. I need your
Yeah.
refreshing of
Yeah.
my soul. I need your guidance, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And right now I'm doing that with my boss, Lord. Help
Yeah.
me with my boss. And don't pray all the enemy prayers about strike him dead and
Yeah.
heap burning coals onto his head, right? But Lord, prepare me a table. I don't know what's going to be at dinner at that table, Lord. It might be Brussels sprouts, but prepare and just have a conversation, right?
It really is. I just love how you did that. That's a great example. Maybe someone listening or watching right now will take that to heart and try it. And Psalm 23 is a great one to do it with as a first time. And you can even go outside the Psalms into other parts of the Bible. There's prayers, prayer of Moses, there's Old Testament um, prayers, there's New Testament prayers, and there's just all kinds of ways to do that. And so it's a good reminder for me. I haven't done that in a while.
Me
So
too.
I think I'm going to try that again.
Well, John 17 is another good one. This is Jesus' prayer, and it's a long one, right? It's a monstrously long prayer, but he prays for himself, he prays for his disciples, he prays for those who are not followers. And so it's a great model. The Lord's Prayer is another one. It's like, we've said that so many times, but
Yeah.
try and put that, how many versions of the Bible are there these days? Over 100, right? And so
Yeah.
put into Tom's Revised Standard Version or Doug's Revised
Mhm.
Standard Version, just have a conversation. Now you mentioned, Tom, some of your leadership journey, really it's a life journey that you've been through is sometimes you went through in a devotional. You were on your blog April the 8th and you talk about a whole slew of things, and I hope those all didn't happen in a year. I hope those were like over decades. But
Yeah.
where can you describe, you talked about your marriage, your business, and pick one or two of those and explain where your faith became a part of your leadership or your life choices, and kind of share a story or two there.
Sure. There was a time when I was on the board of an association that I had co-founded, and a former employee of the association sued the association and named me and the CEO personally in the
Mhm.
lawsuit. And it was it was some it, I think it the case that she was making was some kind of harassment or something. Well, anyways, it was not it was groundless, and yet we we didn't know what to do to protect ourselves, to fight it. We didn't want to go get an attorney and do just send a response, and so I had been putting a Bible on my credenza behind my desk for a while, and so I was really worrying about this lawsuit, and I looked back. I was flipping through, and I came to a verse, and I can't remember the exact place in Proverbs, maybe 26, but it basically says, like a fluttering sparrow, a um, a baseless curse will not come to rest.
Mm.
And I guess those aren't the exact words, but I read that and I was like, okay, well, I think that would apply to me right now, Lord. And and I was pretty desperate, pretty afraid. And so I'm like, well, this verse, I know, Lord, your proverbs are not like fact every time it's going to happen this way. They're true isms. Like if you observe the world more often than not, you're going to see these things happen. So I prayed that it would happen this time. And so what happened is a government agency that was involved ended up saying, because the association is less than a certain number of employees, this lawsuit cannot happen. Like it's protected. And it just disappeared. And I'm like, Lord, how did that happen? Thank you. That's about all I could say.
Yeah.
Thank you. You made that verse come true. And I've never forgotten that. And it's really my faith grew. Back to our earlier conversation, I was worrying for weeks and weeks and weeks. How is this going to turn out? And then boom,
Mm,
just
that's
miraculous.
great. Yeah.
So that would be one story. That was probably 15 years ago. I would say that another one was a business partner situation that was just very difficult. We were unequally yoked, and my faith grew in such a way that I was just overwhelmed by him, my partner, intimidated by him, and the Lord just through different means just lifted him up and just took him away from the business. It was obviously a lot longer story, but that's essentially what the Lord did.
Were you praying the burning coals on his head? Scripture, Psalms?
uh,
No, you don't have to answer that. You
that
don't
and
have
more.
to.
Um, and then 2020 hit. So let's just kind of keep fast forwarding. 2020 hit and the lockdown happened. And half of my business is in the live event business. So we had to shut those down in 2020. So if you can imagine, our business, 50%, well, more than 50% of our revenue just like turned off. And it was the profitable part of our revenue.
Wow.
And so that's when I was wondering, Lord, am I going to have to look for a job? And so through many miraculous things and a lot of consternation and stress and long-term anxiety through that, the Lord restored our business and we were able to do our events again. And just many, many things happened in such a way that I look back and I just see so many ways that he protected us, but he allowed us and me as the CEO to be in that place, to be in that lion's den, to be in that valley, for a time. And I have to look back on it to really get the lessons out. And
Yeah.
and then the latest thing I would say that overshadows all of them was about 6 months ago. We were on vacation, and my wife had a sudden stroke, and she passed away a few days later. And that, as you can imagine, was personally devastating. And I have seen God do amazing, miraculous things surrounding that. And since then, with my kids, with me, with my church, with my business. And I go to a large church, and we probably had thousands of people praying for us during that time. And one of the things that I learned, that I saw, was the power of the church that comes around someone that is hurting. I'd always been on the team, that's trying to help serve and encourage and support someone, but I'd never been the recipient in the way that I and my family were. And that was deeply humbling. And it has made me, kind of ironically, made me trust the Lord more
Yeah.
than I ever have. And that has kind of spired out into other parts of my life. But it's a trust like that includes a fear of the Lord, that he can do anything he wants to whenever he wants to. And so that has really deepened me the most. And obviously, being only 6 months, into the grief process, it's a process,
Yeah.
but he has given me reasons to praise him, to be encouraged, to be joyful. I baptized my daughter a couple of weeks ago on Easter morning. She had it had been a long journey for her, and losing her mom was part of that journey, and it turned into her baptism.
Mm,
And so that's just
awesome.
one thing. I'm an elder at the church, and so many of my other cohorts in that ministry of the church have come around in ways that have been amazing. And I feel like that I've been taken through that valley, you know, literally of the shadow of death. And he was with me.
Mm,
He still is with me. And so that has really added it's adding new dimensions to me that I haven't experienced before, that are coming through grief, through this new kind of trust, through um, my family, through focusing more on my family. I have a 15-year-old daughter, so she's kind of my focus now.
yeah.
And I'm being forced to parent like I've never parented before, and relying on other people, and it's just I guess maturing me in new ways that I've not been mature before. So that would be my leadership and life journey
Yeah.
compressed down
That's
into.
I don't know if it's Daniel in the Lion's Den or Job or a
Yeah,
combination. You've been through, some traumatic things, and as a leader, leadership is lonely, and there's some truth to that. And so how do you just answered the question practically is how do you want a solution, you problem solve, right? Is get me out of this mess. But sometimes God leaves us there, whether it's in the wilderness, or just part of our life journey is to lean on him and not our own understanding, and he will direct our path as you stated. And so sometimes that's a hard lesson to learn, and he is trying to teach us, and wants to see real fruit that lasts a long time. And sometimes patience and gentleness and self-control don't come naturally. And
yeah, for
so
sure.
when you
No, to
when you
me.
are in that shadow of death, or being attacked, or just going through life circumstances, you mentioned it. Have a group of people around you, not like Job's friends, but have the
Yeah,
church around you. Spend time in the Word
right on,
and
right
in
on,
in prayer. You've got to do that.
right on. Yep, yep. So that was a lot. Sorry to voice those heavy
No,
stories on you, but that would be my kind of summary answer of the journey that I've been on past few
you did
years.
mention the Lion's Den there, and you
Mhm.
mentioned First John, I think, in one of your devotionals. What is the, and I think you were talking about fear or worry, possibly.
Yeah, yeah.
What's the answer?
Well, so I did a Bible study back in 2008 or so, where I went through the whole Bible looking for leadership principle from every book. And that ended up becoming a book, and it's called Leading from the Lion's Den, and it published in 2010. So a lot of what I just described to you, I hadn't gone through yet. So, this was more principle based, leadership principles from the Bible. Like I try to get like a fresh principle from each book of the Bible that maybe we hadn't heard before, or was a little less familiar. And so First John, as I was going through that book, the title that I came up with for my chapter was Obliterate Fear with a Single Weapon. And if you think about fear in a corporate culture, it just has all these kinds of negative effects.
Mhm.
makes people like afraid for their job. So it makes them more political and, covering their footsteps and protecting themselves. And they're afraid of their leaders. So they want to be the yes person all the time. They're afraid of being talked about. So they try to get in on all the gossip that's going on because they know if they're not there, they're going to get gossiped about themselves. And suddenly there's all this activity and angst that has nothing to do with the business at hand, with the work that people are supposed to be doing. So it makes everyone less efficient. It makes them do less than excellent work because they're trying to do things in their work that will prevent them from being blamed. They don't take risks because they might be blamed. They don't want to like step out and lead themselves, to lead their group in a bold way, because again, of the politics of fear that I'm going to get blamed and then I might get fired. And so fear creates this culture that is detrimental to the business, to the leader, to the employees, and there's high turnover. And so if we can like eradicate fear, it could fix a whole lot of stuff. And that happened with me. So when I became CEO, it's like 2011 or so, I was inheriting a culture of fear. And all these things I just described, I saw firsthand. And so I came up with a tagline. And it was like basically open, honest talk. We're going to talk, we're going to be honest, we're going to be open to each other. It was kind of the antithesis of what the culture was. But to get back to kind of the main answer to how you like eradicate fear, it in First John, it basically comes down to one verse. So it's First John 4:18a, kind of that first half of the verse. And so this is I would say the most underutilized weapon against fear. It says, "There is no fear in love. Instead, perfect love drives out fear because fear involves punishment." And there's so much in that verse. There's so much theology in that verse. But if we just let's just take it kind of on that surface level, that leadership level, and not unpack the whole thing necessarily. There is no fear in love. Okay, well, if there's a fear-laden culture, let's make it a love-laden culture.
It's good.
Perfect love drives out fear. So that's the principle. God's perfect love, because we can't love perfectly. His perfect love drives out the unhealthy fear that we have. There's a healthy fear of the Lord, right? So revering him, respecting him, not knowing what to expect from him are all healthy aspects of fear of the Lord. But fear, the last part of that sentence, fear involves punishment. So if I'm afraid of getting blamed, there's that fear of punishment. If I'm blamed, I'm going to get punished for doing something wrong. And if we can develop this opposite of fear and make it a culture of love, we can transform our culture and our business. So, for example, let's take that fear of being blamed. If I am not afraid that I'm going to get blamed, what am I going to do? I'm going to take more risks. I'm going to risk making a mistake. I'm going to risk being bold and coming up with an idea that might be a little harebrained to some, but I think it's going to work. It's a new product or it's a new strategy. And if I feel emboldened and courageous enough that I'm allowed to make a mistake and not get blamed in such a way that's going to embarrass me or demote me or fire me, if I'm not afraid that those things are going to happen, I'm going to chase after this or propose this new idea. And what if it's the next, Post-it note, like in 3M, where I'm allowed to come up with an idea and just chase it down a little bit. Whereas if I'm afraid of doing that, and I'm just going to stay in my lane because my lane has been defined as a safety zone. Anything outside my lane is the danger zone, you know, and the Top Gun version of danger zone. And I'm going to be flying out here where there's missiles flying, there's people trying to shoot me down. But if I'm in my safety zone, I don't have to worry about that. Well, what if there's no competing, aces or enemy out there that are going to shoot me down outside these borders? And what if outside those borders represents new territory, creative thinking, new products, new places to take the company, new strategy? If I'm not afraid to go outside these guardrails, great things can happen for the company. So that's just one example of how bringing this lack of fear and more of this love, I'm not talking about like kumbaya, let's all love each other, but like exploring what does love mean? Well, part of what love means is that God is not this God of punishment to me all the time. He is my father. He's my daddy, So while I will respect and fear my father, I know my father loves me. And if, as the leader, as the CEO, or just as a leader of a department or division, if I take that principle of love, the way that my father in heaven loves me, and I try to emulate that with the people under my care, what does that look like? Well, it looks like I'm not going to always be punishing them for things.
Right.
I'm going to help them. I'm going to lead them. I'm going to get down with them. Jesus got into this dirty world with us in such a way that we can trust him, and we know that he's experienced our temptations and our problems in life and our fears, and he's experienced death. So when I have that model, I can now serve my people in the same way.
Yeah.
And I can realize that if they are in a field of predators as a sheep, they're going to constantly be trying to get to the middle of the pack, the middle of the herd. And that's herd instinct. But if I'm being protected, the herd instinct can relax and I can think about different things, I can think about performing better, growing, building my own skill set. So anyways, that's how I would.
That's when what you're talking about, there's leadership responsibility to create a culture. And so your culture might not be a scriptural culture where you can slap a scripture on a mission or vision and put it on your wall if you're not the CEO, but and maybe you can do that. Hobby Lobby's done it, and Chick-fil-A and others, but making that vision visible. But part of it is just creating that culture, which will allow followers to have input in
Right.
they'll have vision to that, they'll have participation in that vision, or they'll be allowed to fail. Maxwell wrote a book called Failing Forward, and creating that culture of allowing your employees to take risks. And even I heard one colonel who said, I have a metric on creating risk and failures because I want to see you fail. And that was like an eye opener for me, going, if you're
Yeah.
not failing, then you're not taking enough risks. And as a leader, if you're providing the solution all of the time and not allowing your followers to help be a part of those solutions, then you're missing out on some great and grand contributions, which have been shut up for too long. Maybe they've been closeted or cloaked. So breaking down those barriers and boundaries as a leader is a big one. And then from a follower standpoint, you mentioned fear. Isaiah, and I wrote this down today in case it came up, was Isaiah 43:1 says, "Fear not, for I have redeemed you." We talked about worry or fear being a sin, but if you can look at it as a believer going into the marketplace or even your job, boy, the last 4 months, I went in every day afraid and fearful of what my boss was going to do and his expectations. What a terrible way to live. And so I couldn't change my boss, but I could change my heart and my mind. and my attitude. And my attitude became one of, you know what? I've got nothing to lose. And so if I can truly fear not, knowing that he has redeemed me, that he's called me by name, that he's my king, he's my follower, he's my friend, he's my solace when I'm going into work fearful or in tears or not wanting to go. In verse 2, it says, I am with you.
Hmm.
And so if you can truly, translate that knowledge from the head to the heart, knowing, fear not, I've redeemed you. I know you by name, Tom. I know you by name, Doug. I know you by name, whoever's watching this. You are mine. Wow. Is that can allow you the freedom to take more risks, a freedom to not worry about fear of promotion or loss,
Yeah.
or an ethical issue, whatever it might be, is just do what God's put in you to do and let him worry about the results. Let him do the worrying
Yeah.
about you, right? Easier
I
said
know.
than
I
done, I
know.
know.
I know. That's true. That's true too. Yeah.
But I ordered your book. And so, anybody who orders that book, by the way, and sends me a copy of that receipt, I'm going to send you a free book of mine as well, because I can't wait to dig into that book, because you do talk about that fear, I guess, right? The Daniel in the lion's den. Is there anything else you'd want to add from that?
Um, well, the only thing I'll add from this book, they chose, when I say they, I worked with a B&H publishing out of Nashville, and we were trying to come up with a title. And one of the chapters was, the lion's den, and I think it was leading from the lion's den, and they just keyed on that because it captures leadership in this world. We're like living in a lion's den, aren't we? I
Mm,
mean, globally, it's in my city, in my state, my country, my just the whole world can be a lion's den at times. And so how do we lead when we are surrounded by so much angst and stress and fear and I mean wars, and um, just the bipolar politics, that we live in our country. And we've had so many challenges culturally in our country. And it's like, how do I lead? How do I do my job that I've been called to do or hired to do in such a way that I can still honor my God and lead well in a secular environment? And so I think that captures where we
that's
are
good.
today. Even though this came out in 2010, it's like more true today
Yeah,
than
well,
it was
it's
even back
it's
then.
based on timeless principles in the Word of God. That always
Yeah,
helps, right?
yeah,
Now
that's
you can do a revision with all of your Job experiences or all your Daniel experiences and probably double the size of that book.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
You also wrote a book called Servant Leader Strong. And so you mentioned serving your people a few times, and I want to dig into that a little bit. And you talked about thriving on conflict, and yes, we have more conflict as a society and in the marketplace, and even ministry. If you look at the sword eating story this week of what goes on in ministries where there's conflict, even
All the time.
between believers.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that and with your followers and with other leaders as a CEO and kind of your journey? How have you dealt with that?
Well, so this book, Servant Leader Strong, um, was another Bible study that I did. Oh boy, four years ago, or no, it took me about 3 years. This came out in 2019, so it's been a while. But what it was a different kind of Bible study. So I was looking for as many leadership principles in the Bible as I could find, not just one per book of the Bible, but like as many as I could find. And I came up with like 250 or so.
Wow.
And during the time that I was reading through the Bible, I was tweeting those out and putting, I was calling it a micro devotion because we had like 144 characters we were allowed. And so at the end of that period, I just collected all those tweets into different buckets, and then I analyzed it with the filter of, okay, what is the main idea of leadership that's coming out of this? It's not just servant leadership, because that is everybody's answer. Because what would Jesus do? Lead like Jesus. It is probably the main one that comes out. But I wanted to look at the Old Testament as well, and how do we add the lessons of the Old Testament and all the Moses and Daniel characters and Samson and Isaiah, how did they lead? Because certainly we have them as models, as just like we have Jesus. So I just wanted to kind of widen my focus on the biblical leadership narrative. And what I came up with is it's still servant leadership, but there's a strength aspect that most people don't equate or juxtapose next to servant leadership. And Jesus, certainly in the New Testament, he certainly exhibited that and he modeled that for us. But when I look back at David and Moses and Daniel, they did some really bold, courageous things. Joshua, and they led with boldness and courage that we don't typically equate to servant leadership. So that's why I added the word strong to servant leader, servant leader strong. So if I'm going to be a servant leader, how do I do that? It's not just gentleness, but it's like gentle strength. It's this almost a contradiction in terms. Now it's become a little more common. I've seen a lot of other books and articles and blogs and podcasts talk about, adding, being a courageous servant, things like that. So it's certainly not unique. I didn't come up with this on my own. But to me, that's what jumped out at me when I studied the whole Bible. And so I just looked at just different buckets of motivation and criticism, again, fear and worry, authority, power, necessary conflict. Sometimes we have to cause division to cast a vision, and there's going to be a certain group of people that are going to resist. Well, how do we lead through that? How do we bust through the ice, and break down a wall?
Yeah.
That's not just serving them through it necessarily in the way that we might define servanthood as washing their feet. It is strong servanthood. It's like, this is the way we're going, and you guys are going to love it, and here's why we're doing it, and doing it in such a way that people don't feel ostracized, and they know why we're going there. They know why we're taking that hill, because if we don't, we're going to be obliterated, by the enemy, and helping them understand why. And so just strong leadership might say, take the hill because I told you. The strong servant leadership is, here's why. I'm going to tell you in 30 seconds, because if we don't start marching right now, we're going to lose it. Let's go, and I'm going to tell you as we go. So that's a military aspect, which you might appreciate. But and so that is the message of leadership that came out to me, and that's what I explored in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And I applied that to my own weakness. So my leadership weakness for a long time was aversion to conflict, and I would imagine many people. I know many people that share that. I don't like conflict to the point of I try to avoid it.
Yes.
And but the strong servant leadership is diving into the conflict with a servant heart. It's not stirring up conflict. It's being unafraid to dive into it. So I have a friend who is a Navy helicopter pilot, and he is an elder at our church. He's one of the leaders that I look up to and have for 20 years. And he does this today, and he would go into the conflict, into the hot zone, and he does that today. he's the most compassionate, loving guy, but he like gets into the muck and mire with people in a fearless way, and puts his arm around their shoulder and says, "Let's march." And I mean, he is my like hero, if you will, my leader that I want to be like, because he's compassionate, he's fearless, he doesn't hesitate to go into the hot zone where there's still bullets flying, or there's criticism, or there's fear, or there's grief. He jumped into my grief in a way like, he literally flew. He got on a plane and flew to the city where my wife was in the hospital, and showed up and was like, "Let's do this."
Hmm.
His son, who is a pastor, did the same thing. It was an amazing following of his father's footsteps. And so, that to me is the epitome of strong servant leadership, right there in that guy that served me and led with incredible strength and compassion
Well, and
during
you
the time I
mentioned
needed.
taking the time. Sometimes it takes time to do that. It's easier just to go implement my goals because I know what they are. But you mentioned slowing down, taking the time. I heard it said in a Harvard Business Review research recently that some of the questions, a couple of the questions that are most asked by employees are, why didn't you tell me? And why didn't you ask me?
Right?
And
Yeah.
so you may not change what you're going to go do, and you may just do an employee survey, which is fine, but there's more to it than the survey, is to having the one-on-one discussions with people and having the skip level luncheons, or having brainstorm coffee, and just getting people's ideas, because when they see their stamp or fingerprints on something, they're bought in, and they'll be more apt to jump up and down and be as excited as you are. When someone
Hmm.
flies to go tell you, let's go do this, and put your arm around them, as they'll already have some level of buy-in there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important, because most of us don't like conflict, and we could have avoided or at least mitigated it if we'd have done some things earlier, slowed down the process, involved others, involved those who we know are going to be the troublemakers, the thought leaders up front, so they can help, market and be influential leaders as well. Who would you look at, Tom, as the leader? And you can't mention Jesus here. You can't mention a president. Okay. Okay. Leaders in your life that have been the most meaningful and have mentored you or discipled you or brought you along is the best. Pick one and why.
I would pick the senior pastor of Southeast Christian Church, where my wife and I became believers in the early mid 90s. And it was probably 9 or 10,000 member church. And this man was, he was at that church for 40 years as senior pastor. And he has fearlessly taught the Bible all 4 decades that I've been, exposed to him and known him. And he retired when he was 63. He's 80 or 81 now. He still preaches at different churches. He preached, he comes to our church and preaches now, still, but he has personally walked with me through my grief in a way that I never expected, that has been amazing to me. And he has modeled for me how to lead a large organization. Now the church is up to like 500 staff, and it's a huge organization. And I mean, he had a couple hundred back then even. And he's led that well, modeled it well. He led the whole congregation, led us, and he helped other churches and other pastors. And now he's one-on-one helping me and ministering to me. He's pastoring me.
Hmm.
I said,
Wow.
Bob, I said, you are still my pastor. Even though you've been gone for 15, 18 years, you are still my pastor just because of what you're doing right now. And that man has been, he's been so well respected by so many that, and spoken well of by so many for so long. It's like, I want to be like that.
Mm,
You know, I want to have the character and the perseverance and the fortitude to not back down, to not compromise my faith, and even to speak out to defend the faith in a large format, large platform. And so if I had to choose one that's not Jesus, I would choose Bob, because he has embodied these leadership principles in a very visible way, a very biblical way. He's not been perfect.
hmm
There's been times that I'm aware of when he wasn't perfect, and none of us are. But on the whole, he would be the leader that I've looked to in the greatest respect.
That's great. I think one of the things missing from the church these days are those relationships of Timothy Paul, of Moses Aaron, of the relationship one on one. And I knew it was missing just a decade ago, and I needed a small group of men. I needed those men to encourage me, to pray for me, to study a book or read together, and it wasn't available. And so there'll be some people listening who know they need that and they don't have it.
Mhm.
And one of the things you can do is reap what you sow and go sow that into someone else.
Right.
And God can honor that. But also I just decided to start a men's study because I didn't feel capable. I felt I was overcome, like we talked about, by worry and fear. And yet knowing that that was a need in the body of Christ, but also for me. And that thing multiplied, and now there's 4 or 5 of them in the church,
Hmm.
and dozens of men are involved with those. And nothing because of what I did, but answering that little still small voice, even out of today's podcast, that go find that one person. If you are 80 years old or you're an older leader, go find that one person in the job who you can be the Bob to, and you can go minister to. Or on the flip side, reverse mentoring is find someone
Hmm.
younger than you that you can disciple and pour into. They got to want it. You wanted it, and there's many Gen Zers and millennials don't want that. So you got to find someone and begin to pray about who that person might be. But that's a great example, Tom, and I appreciate that. You mentioned last thing here. Pastors can do multiple closings, and so this is my last thing, right? Um, you mentioned in your devotional March 26th, reinvention, or maybe there's a time to reinvent. And I know as a corporate leader and a business leader, you oftentimes have to repackage something or come up with a new product or grow a product. But as a leader or as an individual, um, what do you mean by that reinvention? You mentioned this in your devotional.
Yeah, it's not the self-help style. It's not where I'm going to become the best version of myself, where I act out my new self. It's not becoming a different person than I have been. What I mean is refreshing what I'm doing, re-engineering the way I'm doing something, redesigning my life, because I might be in routines that I've been in for decades. It might be when I read the Bible, how I read the Bible. It might be when I work out. It might be just different aspects of my life that I can reinvent my schedule and my routines. I've had to do that. I'm focusing on my daughter. She's got school, and so I've had to reinvent a lot of things in my personal life and re-engineer, what I do, just because I'm now wearing another hat. But also on the business side, we had a bad year last year. And I've been watching it for a while, for 9 months or so, realizing that this trend is not going to reverse. And so at the end of the year, I knew we needed to reinvent the company. And what that meant from the organizational side was to modernize the areas where we're behind. It meant using new tools like AI content tools that are out there that we should be using that we're not. We're kind of ignoring them. We have been. We're not now. It is looking at the structure of the company, looking at the two halves of our company. We have in-person events and we have websites, which are content websites where we sell advertising. All right. So we sell sponsors and sell attendance to our events, and then we sell advertising. Well, the advertising has diminished over these past several years. Our audience has shrunk. And we did a deep dive in why that's happened. Google's changed. There's lots more websites out there. There's media, our media sector had a hard year last year. So bottom line is we're like, okay, we need to look at what's working the best, and that's our events. Those are growing, and our sites are shrinking. Our revenue and audience are growing over here. Well, the obvious thing to do is to pour more gasoline on the fire over here, that, and grow that fire, grow that side of the business, not ignoring this side. So we've had to restructure the company and say, what does it look like with our events being more prominent? And so we're kind of mashing the two together, making events front and center, and making our websites the vehicles where we're promoting our events stronger, and also pushing the content from all of our events on our websites a lot more than we have been. And so we're going to try to build our events, but use our sites as the leverage to do that. And so that's what it looks like with us. So in a way, we're reinventing the model of Networld. We're taking two silos and making them one. Are there two parts of my life that are bifurcated, and my work life and my marriage, as an example? I go to work and it's like, honey, I can't deal with home stuff now. I'm at work. Well, what would that look like if you keep doing that for years and years and years? Well, it looks like a wife who's now distanced herself from you, who might resent your work. And now it's playing out in your marriage and your kids. I mean, there's all kinds of ways it can play out. What would it look like down the road is if now you integrated your work with your marriage a little bit more, meaning you share more what's going on with your wife, with your husband, what's going on in your job, going on business trips, taking your spouse along. There's practical ways you can bring these two silos together in your life. Taking another couple from work out to dinner, with you and your spouse. There's a great way to do that. If you have the authority to do it, do a social event where spouses are invited. Do a Christmas party, invite spouses, get them more involved. Speak to just the spouses. If you're the CEO, send a letter, a card of appreciation to the spouse, thanking them for the support of their spouse who's your employee. So there's all kinds of ways that you can help employees that might not realize that it's a problem right now. And there's ways you can do it together. So you might need to relook at how you see work and marriage in that example. And so are there different parts of your life, or is there one area of your life where, it's kind of like, I'm going to take some time to rethink who I am in my career, who I want to be in my career. What does that look like? What do I need to do in order to execute the person that I want to be? What skills do I need? What degree or what credentials, or what do I need to learn? What experience do I need to have to reach that next level of leadership? So that's a little bit of what I mean and how you can apply it to your business and your personal life.
That's really good. That's kind of my big takeaway from talking to you today is this integration of a biblical worldview or integration of spirituality and the workplace and the marketplace and ministry are meant to go hand in hand. And we as leaders are in ministry every day, every hour, every interaction with a purpose. And so we'll spend days crafting our mission and vision statement and our objectives for the year. But I'm convicted even now talking about this is getting away for a day or two as a leader with just my Bible and a notepad, as I used to do it every year and every quarter. And it's time for me to reinvent myself and do that. And as a leader and believing in God, believing in the scripture, not taking the time to do that is we're only penalizing our people and maybe even the blessings of the business and the outcome, because you have some babies and some things that you are connected to in starting a business or being a leader. Disney did it this week. They're having to sow into and invest into their theme park. 60 billion they're going to go put in. But that's going to be at the sacrifice of somebody's babies, somebody's creations and innovations. And as
Mhm.
a leader, there are some things you may have to sacrifice or put on the back burner. Or as a spouse, there may be some things at work you may have to put on the back burner because of what God is asking you to reinvent or to reprioritize. And those shouldn't be just our decisions. They should be done jointly with our creator and our maker as a partnership, trusting in the Lord with all of our heart, leaning not on our own understanding, but co-creating those. Dr. Blackaby, who I had on a couple weeks ago, talked about experiencing God. What is God's agenda for my workplace, for today, for a theme of the month, for my mission statement, for my goals? Can you measure Galatians 5:22? The fruit of the spirit. How can I go? There's this thing called BAM, BAAM. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but how can I go measure those areas as a ministry leader at work? Whether it's social touches, whether it's lunches with people. I love the ideas you talked about with combining family events and the workplace. And as a leader, or even if you're not a leader in the workplace, you have no direct reports, as a believer, how can you go do that? Starting that Bible study, starting that networking group. There are many ways to go do that. And Tom, I thank you because you've inspired me a lot to go lean on the Lord and ask him, what should those areas be in my neighborhood, in my home, and in my workplace. So any last piece of advice for a leader or as a believer in the marketplace that you might have?
The only thing that I would say is to try a different kind of humility than any you've tried before. And when we think of humility, we think of being deferential to others or not speaking up first in a meeting or demurring when people compliment you. But there's all kinds of different ways to be humble. And it might just be to humbling yourself before the Lord is the new one to try. And that might look like giving more time to him, more thought to him, changing what you're reading or listening to, music, books, whatever, and letting him have his way in every nook and cranny
Hmm.
of your life. And that requires humbly handing over some parts of it. And I'm speaking to myself too,
Yeah.
um, because, if he's going to have his way in me, there are still strongholds of sin that I have not let go. And it takes humility to let those go. And so yeah, I think humility is really deep waters. It's
Mm.
different for different people. We tend to think it's one definition fits all, but what does that look like to you, to me, to anybody listening and watching this in our own lives that I haven't done before, that is deferring to the Lord, that is being more open and attentive to the Spirit in my own heart, in my own thoughts, in directing me, in waiting on Him, being patient. So again, humility is a topic we could probably spend another hour talking about, but it is one last thought I would just leave with you.
No, that's really good. And the best way to come about how to do that is John 3:30, which became my verse of the year 4 years ago, and I've never changed it. It's more of Him and less of me. If I can just accomplish that, and the only way that's going to happen is, like you mentioned, through time with Him, time in His Word, time praying the Word, time changing my reading, time changing what I'm watching on Twitter, or how much time I'm spending on social media. So great challenges. Dana Carvey said, become another person. And that's it's not necessarily reinventing who we are, like you said, or trying to do that in our own strength, but becoming servant leader strong and doing it in His strength. For when I'm weak, He's strong. And
That's right.
so allowing Him that space is a great challenge for us as leaders. So we'll put all the how to get in touch with you. And again, like I mentioned, if you buy any one of Tom's books, and you should, I'm buying 3. I've only bought 1, but now I've got another couple to go buy. Send me a screenshot. I will send you a free copy of my book, A Lasting Legacy, which will help in some of these areas that we talked about as well. But biblicalleadership.com, I think,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
What a source of information that is. If you look at just nothing else, the devotionals, what else is out there?
We have writers that we have different podcast episodes and writers, and there's just a new piece of content every day that's really the how to apply biblical principles to your leadership, and it's all free.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the time, Tom, and what you've sown into people today. We'll be praying for your ministry and your opportunities, and you're grieving. Boy, God's using you despite all the things you've gone through, and I'm grateful that you've allowed Him to do that, and it really comes across. And thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.